Welcome. Thank you for coming to Science on Tap tonight. My name is Carol Warden. I work at UW Trout Lake Station. Science on Tap is an example of the Wisconsin idea, an idea conceived in 1905 that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state. Our partners in Science on Tap include Minocqua Public Library, Lakeland Badger Chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, Oak Fire Pizza, and WXPR Public Radio. And Science on Tap is supported through a grant from the Brittingham Fund to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You have 3 ways to watch. You can come right here in person and join us here at Oak Fire. You can watch on YouTube Live, and when you watch on YouTube Live, you maybe have a way to ask questions on there. Yes, you do. Or you can watch an event later, and you can go to scienceontapminocqua.org and find our events archived there. Our next event is on Thursday, January 5th. Remember, we're a Thursday event now, so we can all come here and enjoy this delicious pizza. We will have scientist Bob Martini talking about successful efforts in cleaning up the Wisconsin River over the last 50 years. So tonight, we have Dr. Jennifer Price-Tack. She's here to tell us about elk and bear research in Wisconsin. Jennifer is the carnivore and elk research scientist with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Office of Applied Science. As a DNR scientist, her role is to provide the best available science to inform management of wolves, bear, and elk in Wisconsin. Additionally, she lends her expertise in decision analytics to a wide variety of natural resource problems within the agency. Jen has a PhD in wildlife sciences from the School of Forestry and Wildlife Sciences at Auburn University, where she studied coyote and white-tailed deer population dynamics. She completed her postdoctoral research at Cornell University and got her bachelor's and master's from the University of California, Santa Barbara. When out of the office, Jen spends her time recreating outdoors, traveling, practicing yoga, or with her husband on the land that they own in the Northwoods. While originally from San Diego, Jen and her husband now call Rhinelander home with their 4 dogs and a cat, ranging in weight from a 12-pound Papillion. Do I say that right? Papillion? Papillon. Clearly I'm not a dog person, huh? Oh my gosh. A 12-pound Papillon, Chihuahua, I know how to say Chihuahua, to a 140-pound Great Dane. Okay, so per tradition, here's your trivia story about Jennifer, but this time we have a little bit of a twist on it. First, I will ask the trivia question, and then I will tell you the story. So, Jennifer has worked with many large animals throughout her research, but which one of these caused her closest near-death experience? Was it A, a bear, B, a manatee, C, a deer, or D, a bat? Bear, manatee, deer, or bat? Bat? Okay, I hear a lot of bats. But the answer is a manatee. So, when out of water, manatees stay still. They wait until the tide comes up so that they can start swimming again. And one time, when on the release boat, when they are on a release boat, they usually exhibit the same behavior of stillness. But one time, when Jennifer and her team were driving a big male out to release him, he decided that he was over the boat ride. He started thrashing and clamshelling like a big fish out of water. Everyone in the boat bailed off the side to safety, and Jennifer tried to do the same, but slipped and totally lost her footing. She immediately started sliding back down the deck of the pitch boat right towards the clam-shelling, barnacle-encrusted manatee. Thankfully, someone saw Jennifer and came back and grabbed her in the nick of time. But if they hadn't, she would have been tangled up with a 1-ton thrashing animal. And while she may not have been killed, the crushing and cutting injuries would have been pretty devastating due to the sheer force of that size of animal and from the sharp, hard barnacles that manatees are covered in. And Jennifer does remember thinking, well, this is an interesting way to go. And she suspects she's the only person in existence with such a story involving a manatee. Now, Dr. Jennifer Price Tech.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Carol, for having me. Thanks, everybody, for having me here as well and for attending. And in addition to that manatee story, I also have to say that the person who saved my life that day is now my husband. So, you know. Yeah. It was my husband. There's nothing like sliding towards this clamshelling manatee and you feel two arms finally come underneath you and like pull you away, and it's just like you're backing away from the light. And that was my experience. Yes, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who has a near-death experience with a manatee, but not with a bear. Anyway, good to see you all today. You know, I'll chat a little bit, maybe share a little knowledge about bear. I'm already learning a lot from y'all as well, so I'm excited to hear some stories from you and hear your questions. Let me start off with, you know, my role and I guess some of the values that drive the work I do within the Wisconsin DNR. Right, so I work in our Office of Applied Science, and so Wisconsin DNR, unlike a lot of states, has a different wildlife management policy side and Office of Applied Science side. So I have a counterpart for all the work I do. I'm the large carnivore and elk research scientist, but I also have a policy counterpart who works with these species as well. So my job is great, right? Like I get to do all the cool research, I get to develop all these projects, and all of these things are directly applied to management. Like it's a perfect position for somebody like me who cares a lot about using science to inform decision making. And you know what's funny is I'm a formerly indecisive ecologist. At least that's how I would describe myself. I'm one of those people who has to research everything to death before I buy the $5 plastic lid. You know, I am that person. So research is like a clear path for me, right? Like I like to find out information, and I hate making bad decisions. Right? Don't we all? Does anybody, you know, have that kind of stress and like get that kind of decision paralysis, right? Where you're like, oh, there's so many options, I don't want to make the wrong choice. It's terrible. So throughout my career, I've been slowly more and more drawn into a subfield of wildlife work, which is decision science. So one of my expertise is in this decision theory field, and I bring that expertise to the agency. So my current job is twofold. I work with the other scientists, and we provide annual population analyses and monitoring for the animals I work with, so particularly with wolves, bear, and elk. That's my trifecta of charismatic critters. And then the other part of my job is when there are research needs that are identified by the state, by committees that are comprised of tribal partners, are comprised of stakeholder groups, and also DNR biologists that, we take that information, I provide them the information that they need to make these really difficult decisions. But as a scientist, an interesting thing that I think is important here when I'm talking about like how I provide that information is that a lot of times I hear this term, science-based decision making, right? And I'm sure everybody's heard it here, like we should let the science tell us what to do. But I think it's really important to note that science can't play that role. Science can provide information, but what science can't do is tell you where you want to go. And I have an example for that. So you think of Google Maps, right? It's this incredible tool. It's got tons of science behind it, these fancy algorithms to tell you the best way to get someplace, given like traffic conditions, if you want to make a stop somewhere, anything like that, right? We all use it. Some people probably used it to get here tonight. Am I right? Anybody? Don't want to admit it? So Google Maps is this really incredible tool. But what is the limitation of Google Maps? Google Maps can't tell you your destination. So it's important. People have to think, it's people's values that really drive decision making. What's an ethical practice or harvest practice? What are the things that we're trying to achieve? These are all values, and I think it's really important that, in my work that I try to help clarify the role of science versus the role of stakeholders and these other groups to define values so that then I can provide the science that's going to help people evaluate how various policy options, for example, involving bear, are going to affect the things that they care about. How is it going to, how are these various policy options going to reduce agricultural damage for folks that are growing corn and are concerned about bear damage to their cornfields? And how are we going to balance that with other groups that, really want a healthy, like a larger bear population, for example? Bear are really important culturally here as well, for recreational reasons, for both harvest as well as viewing. I'm sure many of you have a pretty amazing bear stories that I look forward to listening to. But then there also is this cultural value. Makwa in Ojibwe is a bear, and they're an incredibly powerful and important spiritual species for that culture. A lot of the folks, here, a lot of the Ojibwe are from Bear Clan. So yes, I provide a lot of research, but I always try to tell people, ultimately it's these values. Like, I'm going to provide you the best information I can. I think that's really important. But through decision science, I also try to help people think about what they really want to achieve so we can find the best policies that balance across those often competing objectives, right? So that's a lot of what I do, is I provide that annual work to help people evaluate policy options. And then the other thing is I develop specific research projects to meet research needs. So I'll talk about a couple of those tonight, in particular our ongoing project we're doing with bear litter size and diet. So I've got a couple projects going on. One is this this litter project where we're going out, we're working with the public and folks who have know where bear dens are located. And we take those locations, we work with those individuals, we go out and assess whether or not we can include the bear den in our study. If it's a den that we can access and that it's going to be safe for our crew and bear, we'll actually go into the den, chemically immobilize the animal, and then place a collar on it if it is a female. This is a female-only study. The objective is to estimate bear reproductive parameters in our different bear management zones. And so specifically, we're looking at things like litter size, cub survival, and then litter frequency. And this is really critical information. The whole reason we developed this project is because this information is needed to calibrate, to update the population model that's used to inform harvest quotas. And so again, coming back to wanting to provide the best information possible, this is really critical information that is needed for this population model to make sure that these harvest quotas are going to ensure a healthy long-term bear population. And we don't take these projects on lightly either. If I ever can, I'll avoid a project that requires handling an animal. Keep bears wild, believe in that, and right now, it's amazing, the advancements that we have in science, the things we can do without getting our hands on animals is absolutely incredible. Snapshot Wisconsin. I know we have at least one person who has a snapshot camera. Is there anybody else? Any other snapshot folks? Yep, perfect. So that data, that's a great example of ways that we can get non-invasive information on animals, and we use that information for some of our modeling work. So elk is a really great example. We use that information to better understand the elk population and, again, inform policy. So this is a really special project, and we don't take it lightly. I also want to say I've got Erin Morrison over here, who is Bear Crew, so she's on my team here, and will be doing den work with us. So we're gearing up now. We've had 1 year so far. Last year we collared 13 sows. This year we're going to collar hopefully 25 to 30. Now that we've kind of gotten our feet wet, we've got our protocols in line, and we have like a fully fleshed out decision tree on what to do in each scenario. So we're looking for help from the public. If you know where a bear den is, we would love to hear from you. You're going to be my best friend for the rest of the night. And if you find a bear den, folks that give us the opportunity to go on their property, we do bring them out with us as well. But we'll bring out a couple people, like a landowner or two, but we keep our groups small, of course, because this is really sensitive work. You don't want to overstimulate an animal because, well, I'll go into this in a bit, but some factoids on bear and bear hibernation and shallow torpor. But yeah, so we have this really cool project. It's really like a special thing, and we're going to get a lot of information about it. And we're also, because we so rarely handle bear, are trying to find other ways that we can learn even more to help inform bear policy. And another key piece of this project is we're working with researchers down at UW-Madison and have a postdoc who's taking biological samples from our bear dens and from teeth that have been submitted by from harvested individuals, and then also hair samples from a 2019 hair snare survey for bears, taking all of this information and doing what's called an isotopic signature analysis. And that's something that breaks down these biological samples and can tell us the components of various types of diet. So it gives us a breakdown of, for example, how much anthropogenic food is this individual utilizing? And as you can imagine, this is really informative work. There was a study a few years back by a researcher, Rebecca Kirby, up in Iron County. And she found, using similar work, that 40% of bear diets there were from these anthropogenic food sources. So we're talking bear bait, we're talking potentially trash, etc. And that's an area where there wasn't a lot of agricultural fields, there wasn't a lot of corn. So the thought there is that, like, wow, maybe bears are utilizing these bait sources, these anthropogenic food sources, more than we'd thought. So our work now is going to be able to expand on that effort, and we're going to have a better sense of bear diets across bear range. So pretty exciting. So that's one project we're doing, and I'll talk more about the litter project, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. The other main bear project we have going on is a bear abatement project. The DNR has this abatement program and works with farmers to try to find ways to minimize wildlife damage to agricultural fields. And so specifically, we're looking at cornfields. And this is how they do. Like, a bear will go into a cornfield, plop itself down, and just start pulling the corn stalks towards them. And I mean, if you look, we have aerial pictures of this, and it's just giant holes. It's like crop circles, but it's really bear damage because they can just wipe out acres. It's incredible. Ask me, I'll send you some pictures. So as you can imagine, it's funny, but for the farmers who are trying to make a living off of this, it's a real problem, right? So the DNR works really closely, actually contracts out with some feds too, USDA Wildlife Services, to implement an abatement program to try to reduce damage with various abatement measures. Some are lethal, some are non-lethal, and most are non-lethal. So in Wisconsin, sometimes I call these guys like the bear chauffeurs, because they put out these giant culvert traps, right, into these cornfields, bait them. Bear goes in, and then somebody hooks that up to a car. It slams shut, right? So it's basically a bear in a giant metal can, and they take that bear over to Schwamigan or over to some other forest area and then release it there. So not lethal, great way to go. And there are a couple other abatement options as well. So what our project is looking at is how effective are these abatement programs. That way we can continue to optimize the program to make sure that we're, again, finding that balance to support a healthy bear population while still, being empathetic and trying to help people who are having negative experiences with bear. Very important, something we care about a lot. Is always trying to find that balance. Where is that right balance? So, okay, all right, I feel like we should talk some bear facts, right? Everybody wants some bear facts. All right, I'll lay out a few, and then feel free to ask me. If I don't know, I'll just admit it, okay? Deal? Or I'll Google it here, over there, or Carol, you'll Google it for me. Great. Okay, so our black bear in Wisconsin, the population is doing great. Right now, our most recent estimate from a couple weeks ago, so you're getting fresh off of my computer work here, is about 26,000 bear in Wisconsin. Yes. There's a wide range, always, confidence intervals. This is a science group, you understand. So 20 to about 33,000 bears, but most likely around 26,000 bear. Incredible, right? We have, our sows are about 90 pounds to, maybe 350 pounds tops. And then our boars, I'm sorry, so sow is a female bear, and then we have boar is a male bear. And they can be anywhere from about 125 to 550 pounds. The largest one, I believe, was 710 pounds. And that one was harvested back in 2014, so not that long ago. And there is some evidence that bears might be getting bigger, potentially because they're utilizing anthropogenic food, including corn and things like that. What else? Hibernation. That's always a big one, and it can be contentious. Have you all had folks talk about hibernation before? I think you mentioned that, Carol. So this is contentious because some people don't like to apply the term hibernation to bears. They're not technically true hibernators, like something like a squirrel. So we'll do a compare and contrast. You have a squirrel, which their body temperature, their metabolic rate, all of that is reduced when they go into their den, their nest. And they will still wake up, they're basically like almost near, they're obviously not dead, but everything is really reduced as far as metabolism, temperature, etc. So they are in that state, but they come out of it every week or so in order to go urinate, defecate. Sorry, I know some people are eating. My bad. It's science. Yeah, so they'll go out and actually do that, maybe even eat and drink a little bit, and then go back in the den. Bear are different. There is no in and out with the bear, no bodily functions at all over the entire time they're hibernating. And they hardly move. So for them, their heart rate goes down. So it can go from like 90 when they're awake, normally active, all the way down to 8 beats per minute. Well, what's really unique about bear, their temperature doesn't change very much, unlike squirrels and those. Bear have like these really incredible physiological capabilities, right? So despite the fact that they're in a den for months, they don't have any muscle atrophy. And that's largely because their metabolism, they recycle their amino acids, and they also recycle their calcium, so they don't end up with osteoporosis. They also, again, don't have any muscle atrophy, again, because of that metabolism, that recycling nutrients, and that would have otherwise been excreted in urine. So, I mean, that's incredible. They're so incredible that NASA has come out with researchers here in Wisconsin to learn about them, because there are so many potential implications or ways that could be applied. You think of space travel, like people, long-term space travel, would have to deal with some of those physiological problems. And bear is the species that's helping to inform how that might be possible one day. And that just blows my mind. I think that's so cool. And then there are also these other amazing benefits to human health, things like osteoporosis, for example. So bear are phenomenal. You all knew that, though. You're here. I'm not selling anybody on bears. What else? Cubs are incredible. I'll definitely walk through experiences working with bears in dens. They're born around January, and when they're born, they're only about 10 to 14 ounces, so very, very small. Yep. And then they obviously grow exponentially, just like human babies do, really, while they're in the den. And so they'll stay with mom for that winter. She's asleep in shallow torpor the whole time, and then they'll come out and they'll stay with her that entire year, and then when they're yearlings, so they're a year old now, they will den again with her, and then stay with her until about mid-June the next year, so when they're about a year and a half. And then they'll disperse, she kicks them out, and she'll actually accept and tolerate her female cubs. So often she'll allow them to take some of her territory, or even allow them to take territory or be nearby. However, the male cubs, they get the boot. They disperse. They can disperse far distances, and they have to go find their own area. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I don't know. I feel like, how are we doing on time? Should I just open it up? Yeah, I think that's cool. Ask me some questions. Share some bear den stories.
We'll have Amber with the microphone, and she'll come around, and if you would use that for our online audience to hear your question, that would be great.
I'll remind you, and I'll do it myself, I guess. Hold the microphone really, really close and talk loud so everyone online can hear.
Your predecessor, Bruce Kahn, in 1979 came up with an estimated population of around 6,000 bears. You now state you have 26,000 bears. Any hypothesis about where the extra 20,000 came from?
Excellent question. So I do think, and there's great evidence that suggests the bear population has increased over time. And we can see that because they've expanded their range south as well, right? But there's also some sense that there may have been some issues with that underlying study, and that was shown in the tetracycline study that was done a few years back. And so we're now going through the process of completing another survey of bears to estimate their population size using a new method. So using like genetic work with non-invasive samples again. Yes, non-invasive. And so we're going to have even a more updated information soon enough.
You mentioned that their temperature doesn't decrease, but that their heart rate and metabolism does when they're hibernating. How is that thermodynamically possible?
Yeah, so it does decrease a little bit, but not near as much as like a squirrel or something that really goes down to like near freezing. And the physiological mechanisms, I'd have to read back into that. I don't know right off the top of my head. It's a great question.
I guess I didn't have the right angle here. How many teats does a sow have, and how big are litters commonly? I've been photographing black bears for a lot of years. I had a person come into our gallery some years ago. She had a picture of a sow in her backyard that had 5 cubs with her.
Ooh, cool.
I've seen as many as 4.
Four is definitely, we've seen quite a few with 4. So last year with our den surveys, we had, interestingly, no sows with cubs, with newborn cubs that had 4. But for some reason, I don't know what it was, we had, I think half of the dens that we had that had yearlings did have 4 yearlings in the den, which is pretty incredible. So it does range, between 1 and the most I've ever heard is 6, which is absolutely mind-blowing. Can you imagine? But the average is between 2 and 3, about 2.5 and 3. So younger bears typically have fewer cubs, and as they get older, they do have more cubs. So closer to like 3 or maybe a little bit higher. There are also some additional things like food availability, which drive litter sizes, and there's some evidence that potentially in areas where bear are utilizing these additional food subsidies like corn, that they're maybe having some greater litter sizes there as well. And that's something that we're looking at with our project.
Hey, this might be a longer question, but you mentioned that males depart long distances whenever they get kicked out of the den. What's the longest range you've seen one disperse or heard of one dispersing? And also, what areas do they go to? Do they stick to similar landscapes? Like, do ones from here go down to Dade County or head over to Minnesota? And do other states contribute to our bear population when their males disperse here?
Yeah, great question. I'll try to remember all the parts too. So you'll remind me, right? Okay. All right, so I think the paper that's coming to mind, I remember the average was about 30 to 40 miles that they dispersed from their natal home range. But I've seen examples where they've dispersed over 100 miles. So they can disperse pretty far distances. I'd have to look back on the exact max, but far. Over 100 miles, certainly. And then, let's see, next part of the question. Yes, our bears move all over the place. So they have been expanding further south. And a lot of times, the ones that we see far down south, even in Grant County, are often these subadult, the subadult males that are dispersing and looking for new ranges. So that's one of the indicators that we have this expanding bear population, is that we see younger and male-skewed individuals in those southern areas. And yes, Minnesota bears end up here. Our bears end up in Minnesota and Michigan. Yep, they don't know boundaries, and they go where they want. Did I get them all?
I had a question about bears preying on fawns, on whitetail. So I've heard that that's that you do, and that they can smell a nursing fawn from a long distance. But I was curious if that's true, and also in your isotropic study, if you found a lot of fawn isotropes or whatever.
Yeah,
They
good question. We haven't, so I don't think we're going to be, well, we're still in the work of analyzing that data set, this isotopic signature work. So it's in the lab, and we don't have results on that yet. As far as fawns, yes, bear absolutely will prey on fawns. Largely, it's thought to be opportunistic. Most evidence supports that they're coming across these fawns when they're foraging for berries and other things. You know, that there may be some instances where they are searching out fawns, but largely, at least in Wisconsin, most of the evidence doesn't suggest that that's the predominant case. I've seen a few studies. So there was one study in like Iron County that I think out of all fawns collared in a study, about 8% of the mortality was from bear, and I've seen that number up to 45%. I think I think that one was in Michigan. So huge variability, right? But they're not the largest. Generally, the largest predator of fawns. More often, it's coyotes and bobcat usually take more fawns. Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering what the geographic scope of your specific research was, and also with the genetic testing, all of that stuff. Do you do any work with Monica and Taylor from over at Apostles?
I haven't yet. I hope to. Absolutely. So our work, my work is Wisconsin, really. And so specifically with this reproductive and diet project, we're really interested in getting data and getting collars out in all of the bear management zones so we can get those zone-specific estimates. There are many fewer bears in the southern areas, but so we do also prioritize those if we do get any hot tips about a potential den with sows in it, and cubs especially.
Okay, I think I see most people are done eating, so I feel safe to ask this question now.
I already ruined it for them, don't you worry.
Okay, so earlier you were talking about differences between squirrels and bears and how bears really don't leave their dens during hibernation. So I have a two-part question. First of all, I've heard that bears give birth to their young while they're in the den and hibernating, so how can they support that if they're not going out to feed? And secondly, what do they do about waste if they're in the den and not leaving to maybe defecate like squirrels do?
Yeah, good question. So I'll answer the second one and then the first. So the second one, they don't defecate. They don't defecate for months. Can you imagine the savings on toilet paper? I know. I know, charming bears, right? Never thought about that. Okay, so that's the first one. And then the second one, yes, absolutely. You're correct that sows do have their cubs while they're in the den, and they don't leave. They simply live off of their fat reserves, and that's absolutely incredible. And so they can lose 30 to 40% of their body weight while they're denning, because they're only relying on those fat reserves. It's absolutely incredible. Yeah, thank you. Great questions.
Of your 26,000 bears, how many of them are north of Wausau? And what are the typical dates for hibernation?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to have to guess. It will be a relatively informed guess, but I would say at least, 60% or above Wausau, probably even upwards of 75%, I would say. So it is core bear range, in the northern area, and all of our data supports that. It's also where most of the harvest occurs as well. And then the second question, remind me again? Dates. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So September, October is about the time the bears start going in, like mid-September to mid-October. And the first bears that enter the den are pregnant females. And that's because they need to get in there. They've put on their fat, and they go in first. They're going to have to grow a cub. And say, another thing that's interesting, delayed implantation of embryos is a huge thing, really important. They breed in June. And so they have a fertilized embryo when they breed. They go into the den, and then the implantation occurs. And so then the egg begins to turn into a fetus, and they grow a baby bear cub. And so then they go into the den, September, October, and then the other bears start to follow. And so next you get, usually it's sow with yearlings, and then after that, some of the subadult sows and boars, and then finally, your adult boars. And so that can happen. I've heard that some bears are still moving, which is pretty incredible. And these dates can change a lot, but when bears start going in, it's usually when it's about 50 degrees on average through a week, is about when they start going into dens. But it does change every year. Again, this year I think they're going in some of them have been going in later than normal. So we see them out sometimes even in November. Yeah, and then they come out about mid-April, approximately, give or take. But that's what we saw last year, especially with the sows we were looking at. They were coming out in mid-April. Yeah.
Oh, what kind of collars are you putting on them, and how long are you going to follow them? Are you going to do like cub survival and stuff?
We are doing cub survival. So we're using GPS collars. These things are amazing, fancy. They're like $1,500 a pop. So yes, absolutely incredible. They have GPS devices on them, and then they also have these cool activity sensors, which we're intending to use for some research projects as well. And we change the batteries every 2 years. So our intention is that we'll keep the same individuals collared so that we can follow them through multiple litter cycles, because that's how we'll be able to get information on litter frequency. How often are these females able to reproduce? Yeah, any other?
How long is the study?
Oh, how long? So we put out collars. We have probably 4 more years of collaring, and then we'll follow them until their collars fall off. So an additional 2-ish years after that. And these collars, one thing that's really important to note that we're always conscious of is that we don't want bears to have to wear these collars forever. So we actually have these built-in devices, they're not fancy, they're called cotton spacers. Erin has been helping build them. And basically there's this thick canvas material, so like what you would use with a really fancy tent. And then they have grommets in them, and then we attach that. That's our weak point in between this really tough synthetic leather type material. So basically the point is that since it's cotton, it's organic, it's eventually going to break down over, that way the bear is never going to have to wear that collar for the rest of its life, even if, for whatever reason the collar starts to malfunction. But that's the worst case scenario. Otherwise, we'll be going back in the den, we check them every year, and then we'll be pulling them ourselves at the end of the study.
Because I believe females with cubs are protected from harvest since
Correct.
maybe around 1985 or so. And because I assume they're born at about a 50-50 sex ratio, has that season framework of protecting the females every other year when they have the cubs skewed the sex ratio of the adults?
Yeah, excellent question. And our best data that we have on that is from the harvest, which it does seem like it skews a little bit towards males. Especially makes sense because if some hunters are being selective. We haven't seen major skews in the population size or in the population sex structure, at least in the northern herds, but again, the northern zones. However, in the south, we do see that skew, but that's more because of the dispersing males that are expanding their ranges. Interesting thing, this is, it's only 13 dens last year, 13 sows, but we did have quite an interesting male sex skewed ratio in our sample. So we had, I think, 9 cubs that were males and only 2 females that we found last year in the dens. But 1 year, we'll see what it looks like this year.
So I don't know if you're going to know this question or the answer to it, but this is kind of back to the collaring. Do you think that bear tracking technology will ever get to the point where you could like pit tag a bear?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we do pit tag them, but I think, do you mean having GPS within a pit tag? I bet one day. I don't think it's soon, but I think eventually. Right now, these things are pretty bulky. And I think the biggest technological obstacle is the battery. So having like, we have to have pretty chonky batteries in order for the collars to last for a couple of years. Fingers crossed though, I'm hopeful.
We have a couple online questions coming in. So the first one, can you describe typical den sites?
Den sites, yeah, absolutely. So in Wisconsin, most of the dens, or at least about 50% of them, are associated with trees. So a lot of times we have down trees and big root balls, and a bear will excavate some area underneath that. We do get some other kinds of dens, though. They come in all shapes and sizes. I learned today that one bear was actually found in an eagle's nest. So can you imagine? Yep, pretty incredible. So a lot of them are associated with trees or associated with brush piles. I've seen them in brush piles. But we do get some that are in caves or like underneath rocks, or they've excavated other dens from other critters. For example, I've heard a few reports. I saw one that a bear was using a hollowed out tree trunk, so actually got in a tree. And in the South, like I have bear researchers that I talk to who are in like Tennessee, and they're primarily in dens. So their den work, where we're diving into dens, they're actually climbing up into dens. Like they've actually got like climbing gear on and are doing den surveys that way. So it's variable across the nation, that's for sure.
I have one more online question. What is your view on bear hunters being allowed to bait with chocolate, which has been shown to be lethal to some wildlife?
So bears are, so everybody knows, bears are, theobromine, which is an active ingredient in chocolate, or is an ingredient in chocolate, or a component of chocolate, is toxic to bears. So just like dogs, it is toxic and can be problematic. There had been a couple cubs that were reported that died back in 2011. I think there were 2 confirmed and then 1 suspected chocolate toxicity, that somebody had been baiting with really high concentration dark chocolate, baker's chocolate, and it did result in some cubs dying, which is absolutely horrible. The Bear Hunting Association and the DNR especially, has done a ton of outreach and education on that. And so while chocolate is not banned in baits, there is a ton of education and outreach to make sure folks know that it is a toxin and can cause death of bears. And so that's been, since that time, since 2011, we haven't had any known cases, but it is something that we're always listening for. And I think that if it's a problem, where we're going to see it first isn't in bears, it's going to be in raccoons. So, I think that's important to know too. If anybody sees this issue, or sees issues with the raccoons around baiting, then it would be something to look into for sure.
So this question was a little bit partially asked by the online question asker, but I've come across things in the woods that I'm like, oh, that really looks like a bear den, just like a really big hole. What are signs that is indeed a bear den? What are you looking for when you're going out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I can't ever stop looking at bear dens. My husband and I have property, and I'm constantly looking for bear dens. So some things that I look for are, well, early in the season, especially with snow, sometimes you can see tracks. You can see some activity around the den. It's easier to find dens when there isn't snow on the ground, because snow frequently will cover the entrance, and it's just plain hard to find them. Other things that I look for, I'll look for areas that, especially these down trees. I think that's one of the main places that I've seen them is that they've used tree roots and like root balls to bury under. So when I see those, I typically can't help myself. I got maybe. Beyond that, when there is snow on the ground, we can sometimes see almost like a little breathing hole where there's a hole in the snow, there's some melting, some ice there, and that's where that warm air from the bear breathing is coming out. And that's another thing I'll look for. But don't get too close. I can't recommend that. But let us know. Sometimes they'll come out. We actually use a camera scope sometimes to get into holes when they go deep to see if we can see if there's a bear in there or not.
Kind of a policy question. What has Wisconsin DNR's sort of policy history with working with tribal groups and treaty rights. How has that looked, and how is that developing?
Yeah, I can't speak too much on that. That's definitely in like the realm of my policy counterparts. But I can say that we do work with our tribal partners. It's very important to the DNR, especially in ceded territory. And they're on the Bear Committee, so we work pretty closely with them. I know the biologists, especially at Glyphwick, which is their kind of DNR for quite a few of the tribes around here. So I think, there are always challenges, absolutely, as far as finding the balance and like working towards creative solutions. But I can say that we have personally a very good relationship with the scientists, with the tribal representatives in the science field.
Hi. What about harvest? So 26,000 bears. How does harvest criteria get set, and what does that look like for this year?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it is set with this group of stakeholder groups, tribal partners, biologists, and these stakeholder groups are people like bear hunters, like recreationalists, and also folks from agriculture. So apiaries is another big place where there's a lot of ag damage from bears. They do like honey. Winnie the Pooh did not lie to us. And so we work with those groups. I'm in the room. I'm the scientific advisor there to provide information. But they'll talk through objectives for each given zone. So these decisions are made at the zone level. It'll be and they'll look at various metrics. And so they'll look at metrics related to bear health, the bear population size, what have the trends been, and then also data on things like trends in agricultural damage, trends in nuisance complaints, and nuisance issues with bear and people. And those are the key metrics that are looked at to see, hey, is everything going well in the zone, or is there some reason that we may want to make a bit of a change or may want to tweak harvest quotas to meet that overall zone objective?
Yeah, I got two questions. One is on dispersal. The other one is on agricultural bears. It seems like every year there's a big bear, 500 pounds plus, shot in Marathon County, Shawano County, or whatever, and those are big agricultural areas. Mostly often in corn. And secondly, a lot of times I've heard in the past that dispersal of bears into southern Wisconsin, southwestern Wisconsin has to do with Wisconsin River and other rivers and that type of thing, where they just walk down the rivers and just love it there. Is that a fact or fiction for both those questions?
Yeah, so they do use riparian habitat a lot, especially in spring. That's predominantly where they are, riparian wetland type of habitats. And there is some evidence that they are using those corridors for travel. And then the first part, remind me again, what was the first part of the question?
Some of the biggest bears are shot in
Oh, yep. Yeah, so these bear are taking advantage of corn, absolutely. We have some hypotheses that, especially Rusk and Sawyer County, where there's a ton of corn, but also it's the juxtaposition near core bear range. It's right there. And so this is the area. These are the two counties where the vast amount of agricultural damage from bears is coming from. And, hold on. Yeah, so that's where it's coming from. There are a lot of big bears there. We do wonder if this area, this main corn spot in Rusk and Sawyer is like the salmon run of the Midwest. We're curious. We don't have data on this yet, but I suspect the bear are traveling a very long way. They're migrating in over, maybe even over 100 miles to utilize this corn crop and then leaving when they're done.
We have an online question that kind of follows that up. What do bears eat besides corn and junk food?
Bears eat everything. Absolutely. In spring when they wake up, they're taking advantages of new vegetation, of leaves, of buds, of catkins, etc. And then later on, they really utilize soft mass. So berries in particular is really hot. fawns when they're available, and then hard mass. So acorns is a hugely important crop, or I mean a hugely important source of food for bear diets.
So, do you think the availability or abundance of these people-sourced foods affect their timing of hibernation, like versus like rural areas versus populated areas?
Yep, that's a good question. And there is some evidence, but it's hard to say that some bears may be staying out longer and hibernating later because there's such abundant food. So that is definitely a hypothesis that we've considered.
Another online question, how long do bears live?
Yeah, they can, I mean, it's not uncommon to see a bear over 20 years old. So some of the older ones we see are usually in their late 20s. Early 30s, I think, is the oldest. Yeah.
This is a follow-up to that. How do you age a bear?
Ooh, good question. So aging a bear requires a tooth, actually. And so for our harvested bear, each hunter submits 2 teeth, and one of those teeth is sent to a lab. There's one game in town, it's called Matson's Laboratory, and they actually use those teeth, and similar to tree rings, you can actually count what's called cementum annuli within those teeth. So they drill in and they count the rings within that teeth, and that's how we're able to age a bear. It's pretty crazy. And it's very doable with bear because of that hibernation, because they have this period, just like, there's different, you can see different times of growth in a tree ring, same thing with bear. Nobody has any cool bear stories? Anybody have like an amazing bear story to share?
No.
It's anticlimactic.
Can it ever be anticlimactic with a bear?
Once.
Once?
I work at Apostle Islands National Lake Shore in the summers when you can actually get out to them without a hovercraft. But this last season, we had probably the fattest bear I've ever seen in the wild on the trail, just absolutely devastating the thimbleberries that I was hoping to eat. And we ended up having to haze this bear for like 3/4 of a mile. Like it just was sauntering in front of us and wouldn't leave, anything like that. We've had a problem bear on Oak Island in the past. This one clearly wasn't because it was very fat and happy and seemed to be rather upset that we were forcing it to move. But
I mean, yeah.
it
berries.
finally found a path out back towards the woods away from the cliffs and just sort of moseyed on. But we ended up following this bear probably from me to you away for about 3/4 of a mile down the trail.
Wow, it's incredible. Yeah. Bear hazing can be important. My first work with bear was, I don't know, a scary amount of years ago now. I worked in Yosemite for a while on the bear crew, and as you can imagine, in a very popular national park, there can be a lot of bear-human conflict. And my job as bear crew was largely to tell people or ask people to put their food away and get food out of their car, things like that. But another part of my job was to help haze young bear. We were highly motivated to do this because if bear became a problem, they had to be euthanized. So we wanted to haze them real good. And one of the ways we did that was actually chasing them out of campgrounds with a paintball gun. Imagine young Jen, 23, I think, running through in the middle of the night trying to pelt these poor bear with paintballs. They weren't colored though. I feel like that's important here. There were no polka dotted bears.
And, I was staying with friends in a cabin on the side of Lake Tahoe. And it was just a little unimproved cabin. I had a wood stove, doors and windows and things like that. But the fridge, or the kitchen, had a big picture window. And they had the fridge covered up with a sheet. And they claimed that bears can recognize a fridge and know that that's where your food is, so they would put this sheet over it. Have you ever heard anything like that? What do they recognize?
Hysterical.
I don't know.
I have questions, certainly.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, I mean, their sense of smell is incredible, right? So I don't think, I can't imagine it's really a visual cue as much as a scent cue, potentially. But I don't know, there could have been one bear that just happened to learn that, whoa, this object holds a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, bears are really smart, and they all have their own individual personalities, and they can learn, so I'm not going to totally shoot it down, but I have questions.
I have another online question. Do bears have to empty their digestive system before hibernation, and how do they do it if they do?
Yeah, just the normal way. I don't.
I think, is there
How much
anything,
detail do you want? No, I was kidding.
is there
No,
anything
it's a
that
good question.
they eat to help them do that too?
Yeah, no, nothing in particular. They just kind of go, and sometimes they'll go into their den, and they'll come back out a few times too. And I think that might help with the vacating the innards process. But other than that, they don't do anything really specific to get them into hibernation zone, at least digestively.
Okay, so you mentioned that you worked in Yosemite, and I also worked in California. I worked in the Sierras on a project with fishers and pine martens. So I saw a lot of bears there. There are tons of bears out there.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had noticed any size or behavioral differences from the bears in California versus the bears here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, ooh, okay. I do, especially in the Rusk-Sawyer County area, I have seen much bigger bears than I ever saw in Yosemite. A lot of the bears in Yosemite we saw were usually younger too. And then I think the main difference that I would say is that the black bears in Yosemite and in California, as you saw, are largely brown. We don't have very many black ones out there. Versus here, they're all black. There aren't many color variations at all. Out there, you get some blondes as well. Some blondes, a few blacks, but largely brown.
So because there's an Apostle Islands person here, I have to tell a little ancient Apostle Islands history. I was a ranger on Stockton Island back in the 80s when they had a very legendary bear out there. But I'll only tell part of his story because it's quite long. But one night we were trying to find this problem bear that had been done in the campground, and so all the staff were out searching on the trails, following the radio signal. After a couple hours, we gave up and we came back to the ranger quarters, only to find that the bear had gone in the crank-out window and eaten the maintenance staff person's white bread that he'd left on the counter and left tracks all over. So he was very incensed at the loss of his bread. And they all headed out on the trail again, and I decided I'd had enough for one night. I went to go to bed in my little bedroom in the ranger quarters, and then I heard this scratch, scratch, scratch on the window. I'm like, okay, this is like back in the 80s. The guys, it was mostly men, and I was the only female, and I was like, okay, guys, that's, I know that's you out there, so I'm not going to fall for it. I figured they'd snuck around the building and they're, trying to make bear noises. Well, it turned out it was the bear scratching on my window screen. And he was caught a few weeks later, and there's much more to the story, but that's a story for another time that I'll share with the Apostle Islands crew. So.
Very nice. Thank you.
Because Terry Dalton is my wife, I think she's got another story she should tell. The time you gave the lichen talk on Stockton Island.
Let's hear it.
Terry.
Okay, well, I'll make it fairly short. So this bear, it's the same bear. And, little known fact is it was my fault. I think deep down inside I harbor guilt for this because I was the first one it got food from. I had mistakenly left the door to the garbage shed open in the spring, and that bear had gotten garbage. Anyway, but long story, we were trying to catch him. He was a problem. He was going out on sailboats and leaving footprints. And first time I'd ever seen sailboaters not clean their boats. For weeks, they had the bear tracks on their boat. Like, ooh, we had a bear. Anyway, we were trying to catch this bear, and we had the barrel trap behind the ranger quarters, and every time we would set the bear trap and open it up, the bear would go all the way to the other end of the island. You could tell from the signal. And we'd close the trap because we did not want to track other bears in. And then it would come back and bother the campers. So one night, we had opened it again, and we were waiting, hoping to catch the bear, but the campfire circle was right near there. And I happened to be giving a talk on lichens and leafy liverworts.
Ooh.
And I had about 80 people there listening to my highly entertaining talk on non-flowering plants. And I was here, and the group was there, and the campfire, and I could see down the trail, and all of a sudden I saw the bear coming down the trail. And I said, "Don't move, anyone. The bear is coming down the trail." So they all froze. But of course, it was behind them, which is sort of probably nerve-wracking. I could see the bear, but they couldn't. Anyway, the bear comes down the trail, walks right behind the quarters, and I'm kind of saying, "It's going behind the ranger quarters." And they're all like, and then we hear it shuffling through, and then clang, the door of the trap closes, everyone leaps up, cheering, the bear is in the trap. We go back and look at it, and then of course we have to go back and finish the program on the non-flowering plants. And they're all sitting back down. I'm like, "Don't worry about that bear. It's fine. Now, wouldn't you like to hear more about lichens?" And then the bear rumbles, but anyway, the next morning they moved that bear, moved it west of, on the peninsula all the way over towards the Minocqua Barrens, and it stayed over there for a while until, maybe by Labor Day weekend. It was kind of on a beeline back to Red Cliff, was seen on the shore of Red Cliff on Labor Day weekend, and by the next Monday, it was back on Stockton Island, but it never bothered any campers ever again.
Maybe it was really into lichens. Just wanted to hear. Yeah, bear wanted to hear your talk. I think that's amazing. Yeah, bear stories, aren't they the best? So doing litter surveys, what kind of person do you think is ideal for our crew? Like what are characteristics of a bear crew member? Carol, what do you think?
Oh, no. Small. That den, but I guess if a 500-pound bear could fit into it, you don't need a small person.
Yeah, so someone with a freeze instinct. I like that. All right, anybody else? What kind of characteristics are useful? At least one person slower than you. Yep, absolutely. Aaron, you better be slow. Yeah, not claustrophobic. Huge. You don't even know. Yeah. The new person we're going to hire for Bear Crew. Yeah, we will be hiring soon. Yeah. Anybody else? Somebody slow, somebody small, not claustrophobic. These are all good. I think the best person would be a rock climber. I kid you not, because they're flexible, they can get into a bear den, and they have really good grip. And that's critical, because we're going down. So there are two different types of crew members. We have den divers, and then we have sow lifters. So somebody also has to weigh the sow, which, as you can imagine, they're even in the middle of winter, they're still pretty heavy. But the den divers, you have to get down, and it's often awkward, very tight spaces. And you think these bears are going to be asleep, but frequently they are not. And they are staring you in the face while you're trying to shimmy down this tight place. If there are yearlings in there, it gets real tricky real quick, because sometimes you just have this wall of bear fur. You're like, I have no idea what is what. Is that a foot? Is that a face? How many bear are here? And you somehow have to sort out who's where, what's happening, and one of them staring at you, and there's another one back there, and you're like, I don't know how this is going to go down. It can be kind of a rodeo almost at that moment, just trying to make sure you're really careful, because we never want to double dose an animal. But coming back to the rock climber, it's because we still have to get these bear out. And I don't know how, at the beginning of denning season, sometimes they're able to fit in. Because there are times where we have backed out and just said, you know what, nope, we can't do this den because we don't think we can safely get this animal out, because this hole is so tiny. There's no way. I don't know how it did it. How did you fit in there? So one of the things we have to do as a den diver is like we'll go in, we'll chemically immobilize the animal, back off, but when we go back in, we still have to get this animal out. What we will not do is put a strap around the animal or anything like that, because that can put too much torque. We might dislocate or break something, or break a bone, and that's absolutely not what we want to happen. Every single day, every single time we go out, our first priority is people and bear safety, absolutely every time. And so if there's ever a major issue, or if there's ever an issue that we don't think that we can mitigate the risk, we call it a day. That's it, we're going back to the office. I probably have emails to answer, So we get in there, and you've got to pull out the bear, so we have to do it by hand. That's the safest way to do it, to make sure we're gentle, we're not putting too much pressure. But it is not easy. It is cold. You are in a very tight space. You can't use any leverage whatsoever. So I've decided the perfect person is somebody who is flexible enough to get in there, but strong enough to hold on. So that's it. Rock climbers, we're hiring soon. And we have one already. Yep. Yeah, that's my random factoid.
I assume you're collaring the sow whether there's new cubs or yearlings, but if there's yearlings, are you marking them in any way or collaring a yearling sow?
Yeah, so we do collar the sows regardless, but the yearlings, we don't tag them, but we do take some hair follicle sample. We take some genetic samples, and we send those to the lab. So that is part of it. So we don't have to do any kind of long-term mark. We just take genetic samples so that next year like this year, for example, if there was a cub from the first year, we'll take genetic samples. And if there were 3 last year and only 2 this year, first we're sad, but then we will send those genetic samples in and see which one survived, or which one survived and which one passed away.
I have 2 last questions for us. How are bears affected by climate change?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're still not 100% sure. There's going to be a lot of variability in how climate change can impact bears because of things like how it's affecting hibernation cycles, for example, how it's affecting food availability, and are there some mismatches happening there? I think at least largely right now there aren't major population level impacts that are causing a threat to population size. I think where we are seeing, though, is maybe some changes in that hibernation pattern and when they're actually entering the den. Because in some years, if it's warmer, they're going to stay out longer.
Last question. Is there any chance Wisconsin will stop allowing baiting and hunting with dogs?
I don't know. It's going to be one of those questions that the committee will continuously address and evaluate what's the best way to balance across multiple competing objectives. Yeah.
Well, join me in thanking Jen. Thank you to all of you who participated tonight, and thank you to our sponsors, the Lakeland Badger Chapter of the UW Alumni Association, Minocqua Public Library, UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, UW Trout Lake Station, WXPR Radio, and the Brittingham Foundation. Next month, we will be here on Thursday, January 5th, and we will hear from Bob Martini on that. And if you'd like to sign up for any email reminders, you can go to our website and click Contact Us, or leave your email address on our sign up on the back of the room. Thanks.